Hello, and welcome to Autism Network Scotland's new vlog in conversation with Neil. This afternoon we are looking at the coronavirus pandemic and its impact on the autism community with Callum McCrosson, who is the National Autistic Advisor for the Richmond Fellowship Scotland. To start with, could you tell us a wee bit more about yourself, when you got your diagnosis and how you came to work with Richmond Fellowship?
Certainly. So I was diagnosed, it was the term Asperger's syndrome at the time in 2011. I had struggled for about 10 years prior to that, just with kind of issues around depression and anxiety. My diagnosis was never picked up. A lucky referral to the correct person picked out and got my diagnosis at that point. From there I went into support with the National Autistic Society Scotland, who ultimately ended up giving me a bit of work to do as a volunteer, and that led me on to working as a support worker for a number of years, then running some different projects. That all kind of, I suppose, led up to, in December of last year, I joined the Richmond Fellowship Scotland, and I'm now their National Autism Advisor.
What's your sort of opinion on the pandemic? Do you think has it had a negative effect on yourself, or have you really sort of enjoyed it in a way? Because I know a lot of autistic people like to be almost self-isolate themselves anyway, and don't interact socially.
It's been funny for me because it has had its positives and its negatives. There is, so I suppose it's maybe easier for me to break this down in different kind of sections in my life. The professional working side of things has, again, even individually within that, had its positives and negatives. So I work full-time, 35 hours a week. My job is typically based between being in a kind of the administration office or going out to services. So I'm always meeting people and I'm always around people. And there are issues around my kind of social stamina when I'm working normally with the kind of how we're set everything up typically, that sometimes we'll just have weeks where there's been so much people have met and so much information, and it takes a lot out of me mentally to process everything that's happening around me. That issue has been almost entirely negated because of working from home, working a bit more isolated from people. I'm still having a lot of meetings and a lot of phone calls, but the privacy in between the calls and meetings, and I'm not sitting in a kind of shared office space, helps a lot to decompress and make sure that I suppose I'm being healthier mentally about that side of things. But then there have been the negative sides of working from distance for me, that I'm someone that I do enjoy my interaction with my colleagues, but I take a lot of my cues and how my pace of work and the satisfaction of the work that I'm doing from the reaction and interaction with my colleagues. So just little things of you're working next to someone and you could pass them something you're working on and say, would you mind having a look at this to see if it's all right? Oh, I'm just working on this. And then you just have a bit of chat around that and you get that kind of positive affirmation that, oh no, I'm doing the right thing here. I'm continuing to do that. That's been something that I've had to be more active about, instead of it being such kind of casual process. You're sending specific emails, you're arranging specific phone calls and meetings to say, can you help me with this? The kind of social side of things in terms of being isolated from people, I'm someone who's pretty kind of self-assured and confident about how I kind of make decisions and portray those decisions in terms of socializing with people. I'm not someone that goes out and has a lot of friends and talks to people a lot of the time, but I've never been shy and had a problem of saying that's the case with me. I'm quite happy in my own company. I'll sit here at my desk I'll sit and play some video games, I'll watch a movie, I'll maybe go out and do something socially once a week. I think for a lot of autistic people, because I've heard this as well, of like enjoying the lockdown because it's taken off some of the pressures, is the pressure it's taken off is feeling that it's not okay to be that type of person, that you can just be the person that's isolated and you don't have to justify that to everyone else around you. So it has been of some benefit to me, but maybe not that big of impact on me personally as it has been for other people.
That's wonderful. So, I suppose, what sort of advice would you give parents? Do you think they should just let their, or carers, etc., support workers? Do you think they should let their kids just self-isolate, or do you think, I've been chatting with an autistic person who's got into a phase where they can't even leave the house because they're so worried about COVID-19 and they're going to catch it and it's going to be dreadful, and they're going to be arrested by the police because they're not supposed to be out, and there seems to be so much misinformation. How would you advise the sort of support networks to help the autistic person come out of lockdown?
I think the first question that I would ask is, what's like, is the person that you're supporting happy? Are they satisfied and happy and have made an informed decision about the circumstances that they're in? Almost remove it entirely before we go back to about the idea of like the lockdown and the implications of that. If someone is isolating in their house, or is just generally socially isolated, but again, that's an active choice they've made, or they're receiving social interaction from a more like non-traditional way, that might be through like playing online games with people or using online chat rooms and things like that, is having a wide group of friends that are just not physically around you. If that's the case, then there's not much need, if any need at all, to change those behaviours. It's much more around what are the possible implications of isolating them that are negative. Now, there are lots of people who will isolate and still want to have a job and work. Now, it's incredibly hard to find a job where you can work totally in isolation, not with other people, and developing those social skills is something that is important to succeed in the world of work as we've currently got it. I would love for there to be a whole-scale change to make sure that it's much more about the productivity and the intelligence and capability of a person than their social ability, but that's not where we currently are. So then we have to put into place measures that make sure that the person is developing those skills, maybe little by little, because that's ultimately the goal of it. It's not just about making sure the person leaves their house because that's what people should do. It's, well, okay, you need to develop these skills in order to be successful at work. Let's go do that. And that's becoming your motivation for doing it, as opposed to just some kind of abstract notion that this is what human beings should do in the year 2020. With regards to removing people from lockdown and all those kind of the implication of, I guess, returning to normality in some way, that's one of the bigger challenges that certainly myself and my colleagues are worried about and preparing for going forward. There is, as you said, an absolute mountain of misinformation. What exactly does it mean to have COVID-19? When do you show symptoms? Did you have it before? How do you pass it on to people? Can you have it twice? Questions that people don't really know the answer to right now. So like, we're not being told the proper information that we need to know. In cases like that, I would be much more kind of cautious and taking things as slowly as possible, at a responsible pace, I should say, maybe. We know that getting back into society is something that's going to happen for everyone at some degree, but there isn't a right answer to how fast someone should go back into society and how should return to normality. For some people, I'm sure that might be a very quick transition of can't wait to get back to where we were before. We can basically go through all this within a few weeks. it's probably going to take quite a number of people a couple of years to feel back to where they were at the start of 2020. And the job of anyone within a supportive capacity, whether that's a professional, a parent or carer, unpaid or paid, is much more about adapting to the capability, capacity of that person at that time in order to achieve what they're wanting to achieve.
Right, that sounds good. I suppose leading on from that was really how has COVID-19 affected the way you work, the way Richmond Fellowship works? You know, has it had an impact on the type of work and support you can deliver, or has it kind of been more business as usual?
No, it's had a massive change for us. So on a wide number of fronts, we were actually very proactive, I feel, in the kind of early, you know, in the early stages where we could see this was becoming a bigger deal. So in the kind of January, February, of like thinking ahead and making sure that we had things that we were like, systems in place that could cope with the potential ramifications. One of the first things I suppose that we noticed was the an issue of our staffing levels. So when the initial call went out to make sure that if you were a vulnerable person, then you had to self-isolate. If you had kids, you were self-isolating. That meant that at one point, approximately 48% of all of our staff, which is over 3,000 staff members, were off on leave. So all those people who were supporting people, they couldn't cover their shifts. So there was a big problem that we had to solve, and our colleagues in HR, thankfully not directly my work, my colleagues in HR solved this problem of we had a massive recruitment drive. Our colleagues in my colleagues in learning and development changed their model of induction training to make sure they got as many people through training as efficiently and as well as possible, so that we had many new sessional and bank workers covering shifts from people who were self-isolating. So we got every shift covered in a very quick amount of time, I suppose, because we were working a little bit ahead of our game. But then with regards to the people we're supporting now, a lot of the people we support are in 24/7 residential care. These will be individuals who will have one-to-one, two-to-one support 24 hours a day or very close to it for their entire year. And a normal week for them would have been very structured and routined, where they would have had activities in the morning, and then maybe in a kind of just post lunch, for example, they might have had, we're going to go for a walk in the community, we're going to go for the shops, we're going to go to the swimming pool. Now, as all the shops closed and the swimming pools closed and you couldn't sit around in the park anymore, we couldn't take up any of those activities. So then everyone's daily routine changed to being a lot more, okay, what can we do that we have access to? And that was the biggest challenge for our kind of operational support teams. There's still the exact same number of hours in the week that you've got to fill with an individual, but then you can't do the fun things that they want. So we start thinking about, okay, what creative hobbies and activities can we do in the house that this person enjoys? But then we have to work with them to understand why they can no longer go to the swimming pool every week, something that they might have based their entire week around as being a cornerstone. That has been the biggest challenge, that at this point, for the majority of people we support, they have adapted and become accustomed to where we are right now in a lot of ways. That process is now happening in reverse, a little bit like what I was saying, kind of, I suppose, in a previous answer about we're now thinking about getting them back into going swimming, going back out to the park. And that means that they might have grown to particularly have an interest or love for the creative hobby that we've started doing within their home. That's great, we can still utilise that, but maybe we have to remove that and explain why that's been removed in order to replace it with something else. And that happening basically essentially 3,000 times all across the country right now for the Richmond Fellowship is a challenge, I would say.
That's ideal. So we were kind of thinking there as we're coming out. What do you think the autistic community as a whole can learn from the pandemic in how to, I suppose, utilize more modern technologies such as Zoom or Microsoft Teams or all the rest of it to improve their social connections and their social networks? Because obviously, as always, funding is at a premium. There's never enough money. How can we learn from this to use the technologies that make it easier and perhaps less expensive?
I suppose on a kind of personal level for autistic people on a personal level as opposed to kind of professional supporting them. Most of the autistic people I know, and it's certainly true of myself, have always been someone that I've relied or been interested in the kind of latest technology and utilising things like, chat rooms and, basically just anything that's a bit of like distance socialising as opposed to face to face. It's a bit more comfortable for a lot of people for a variety of reasons we tend to find. What's probably happened, and this is maybe something we can like reflect on through research and thinking about it for a longer period of time, is that the neurotypical population have came a little bit more close to being like similar to how autistic people have historically been with these with their interactions, in that we became very routine and structure based out of like a necessity to maintain everyone's mental health regardless of whether or not they have autism. Something that I always benefited from in the past but never really received. That I would often say to my colleagues in HR that one of the things I appreciate is, okay, I know when a meeting's going to start. You've told me a meeting will start at 11 a.m. Great. When's this meeting going to finish? The general assumption is that we work on, okay, it'll be half an hour or it'll be an hour. But there have been plenty of times that I've been in meetings there where it ends up going on a bit longer, or it's a 45-minute meeting, or it's just until we've run out of things to say. And not having that end frame historically has been a bit of a challenge because I mentioned earlier about issues around maintaining social stamina. If you know how long you've got to be like sociable for, it can be easier to push through that barrier. It's very much if you're doing any physical activity, if you're running, it's easier to set yourself a distance of I'm going to run 5 kilometers as opposed to I'm just going to run until I'm tired. Mentally, it works a little bit better to set yourself targets and goals.
That's really interesting. I suppose the next thing I was going to ask was, what are the sort of things you think that neurotypicals can take out the pandemic to help them better understand? We've obviously chatted about the fact that neurotypicals are kind of getting a sense of what autistic life is like with this very structured and self-isolating world. What do you think they can take forward in helping learn and understand and empathise with autistic people as we come out of lockdown?
I think one of the important things we have to message about the understanding of autism is that there is no autistic behaviour that's not human behaviour. It's something that it's about the frequency and the scale and the ability to inhibit these behaviours that's perhaps different within autistic people than it is from your neurotypical or otherwise disabled populace. It would be nice, and this is going to require a large degree of self-reflection on non-autistic people, that they realise that everyone has challenges related to communication, related to social interaction, and related to sensory issues. Everyone has something about themselves that is slightly different because there isn't a standard of perfect normality in people. There isn't this like you're exactly supposed to be this. That we all become a little bit more accepting of, okay, well, someone prefers to communicate via email or someone prefers to communicate via webcam, then that's the way that they do that, and we're okay with that, and we'll adapt towards them.
That's ideal. Well, I'll just say a final thanks very much for this afternoon. As I said, it's been very interesting to talk to you.